Hey everyone, it's Abby with the Bead Place and beadplace.net, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a wire jumble bead. We're going to be using a yard of half hard temperament 20 gauge copper round wire. We'll also use about 6 inches of 12 gauge coated aluminum wire. We will have a variety of 4mm bicone crystals. I'm using birthstones. You can use whatever you want. And we're going to get started by straightening and kind of work hardening our length of coated aluminum wire. It does need to be coated so that it is extra smooth. We have our yard of 20 gauge wire, and we're going to hold it a little bit over from the middle, about 3 to 4 inches from the end of the copper wire, and we are going to start to wrap it around the coated aluminum wire so that we're anchoring it on, yet we're also leaving it like a handlebar to hold on to the wire with as we coil the long end around. So we're going to be trying to coil this as neatly and evenly as possible. Try to keep your coils tight and smooth. But this is just kind of like the base of our bead. So if it's not perfectly uniform, no worries. We just are trying to keep it straight, and we're going to try to avoid bending that aluminum core wire as much as we can. But if it gets a little bit bent, it's okay. This beginning coil, we're going to coil a little less than an inch long, but we're creating like a smooth bead hole or drill hole, if you will, so that when we string our bead later, it will be very easy to string something through it, whether it be jeweler's wire or a cord or chain. So just wrap until you have a little less than an inch. And you can, of course, vary the size of these beads. I just like to use this size for this particular length of wire. So now we're going to get rid of that handlebar by just kind of loosely coiling it around the coil that we just made. You can do this evenly, or you can just wrap it wherever it wants to go. We're just going to tuck the tail end down with your chain nose pliers, and try to avoid opening up the base coil that we made. Like, don't squeeze the tail end down so hard that you separate those coils that make the base of your bead. And then make sure to straighten your wire, your base wire, as you go to avoid making a bead that does not have a straight hole all the way through. So make any corrections that you need to make, straighten the wire, and then we're going to take the long end of the wire and we're going to start bulking up the bead. So you can start by wrapping the wire back around in the opposite direction. And if it's easier for you, you can bend the tail ends of the base wire up just so that you can hold on to it a little bit more easily. Sometimes if the base wire isn't bent, it can start to spin around on you. So that's just a tip that I have for you if you are having a hard time holding on to it. So as we're coiling this wire, what you're going to want to do is try to focus the wire in the middle of the bead rather than the very ends. You just want to kind of form a football shape. When you leave those ends open, it creates kind of a neater shape and a more intentional looking shape. But these are just my guidelines. So once you have a base of your wire down, we're going to go ahead and start to add those crystals on. Make sure that you're adding them on one at a time. Don't pre-string all of your crystals and try to work with them that way. You want to add one on. Make sure you're in a spot on your bead where you want your crystal to land. That's definitely important. Make sure to kind of nestle it in where you want it to go, and then you'll want to place your thumb over the top of it and also kind of brace the wire around it. That way, when you wrap the tail end around the back, your crystal will be less likely to pop or crack because you're stabilizing the wire around it. And you know, sometimes even if you're doing everything perfectly, when you go to add these crystals, something slips, something will inevitably kind of jar out of place, and you might pop a bead. So it's always a good idea to have a couple extras on hand to replace. And then an extra tip that I have for you is if you've cracked a crystal that is a few wraps back, and you don't want to unwrap it because that's a nightmare, what you can actually do is take your pliers in and you can kind of crack that crystal off. The broken one, of course, not any of the good ones, but just make sure that when you are doing that to cover with your hands, or make sure that you don't have little pieces of broken glass flying everywhere, and make sure to clean it properly. Make sure all the little pieces come out. So then you can go in and add your replacement beads. Make sure you're bracing them with your finger, nestle them in where they're supposed to go, and then wrap around. And then that way you'll have better success. You'll be less likely to crack any of those beads, and things will just kind of move along the way you want them to go. So make sure that you're adding your crystals sooner than you think, because you're going to run out of wire pretty soon. And you don't want to not be able to include those beautiful crystals. So once you've run out of wire, what you're going to need to do is figure out how to anchor the tail end on. My favorite technique is to grab my chain nose pliers, make sure that your chain nose pliers is smooth on the inside, no serrations, and you're going to grab the tail end and form it into a little hook. Now, depending on your design, that can be like a J-shaped hook, or it could be more like an L-shaped hook. We just want that hook to be able to hook into the wire. Now, this is why it's so important for us to use half-hard temperament wire rather than soft wire. It's because we need it to be sturdy enough. That little hook on the end needs to be sturdy enough to hold the whole entire shape of the bead together. So these beads are a lot more sturdy using half-hard temperament wire. Now what we're going to do is we are going to cut half of our base wire off. You only want to cut one side. You do not want to cut the other side, because we need that other side as our handle as we work the tail end out. Now, an accessibility tip: if you are having a hard time grabbing onto this with your hands, you can grab your pliers and work your bead off, but work it off slowly and gently. Don't yank it off, because we don't want to misshapen our bead. And now it's time for the magic to happen. So we are going to whip up a solution of liver of sulfur. I am using warm water and liver of sulfur extended life gel. Keep in mind, the warmer the water, the faster the reaction will happen. So we are going to just plop that cute little bead right into the solution. Please keep in mind this is stinky, so don't get right in its face like I am doing here. I just want to give you guys a better view of how this reaction happens, and it quickly darkens and turns black. Always remember to follow the instructions on your liver of sulfur. But what I like to do is take it out once it is my desired color. My desired color is all the way black. And then we're going to swirl it in clean water. You could do a baking soda solution with water to neutralize it. I don't think that's necessary for this particular project, but we're just going to make sure we rinse all of that liver of sulfur out of the nooks and crannies, and then dry it off with a clean cloth or paper towel. You can even buff it a little bit if you went overboard and left it in for too long. But now what we are going to do is clean the wire with a polish pad. So this is a micro buffing pad. It has a little micro abrasive surface. So what it's doing is actually polishing and buffing the bead. You want to make sure, since it is a buffer, that we don't go heavy over the crystals. We just want to clean the oxidized areas off of the wire. So we're just highlighting the tops of the bead and increasing the contrast, depth, and detail of our work. So this is probably going to be the longest part of this entire process. Whipping these beads out with the wire wrapping steps can get pretty quick and fun, but then the fine details, the polishing, making sure you have everything the way you want it, this is the lengthy part. But just kind of enjoy the process. Make sure you're intentional with where you're polishing to get the best finished result. You want to leave a little bit of darkness in the recessed areas, but you can use kind of the corners of the polish pad to get under some of the wires that might be tracing across the top. Just try your best, like I said, to be intentional with where you're polishing. I like to really focus on the ends, the edges, and that kind of brings attention to the more refined parts of the bead, if that makes sense. And then after you have polished your bead entirely and you're happy with how it looks, make sure to not only wash your hands with soap and water, but you'll also want to go ahead and wash the bead. After you've washed your bead, you'll want to make sure to manually dry your bead thoroughly, and that will prevent the potential of unwanted discoloration that could happen as a result from the copper reacting with the water or any of the chemicals or minerals in the water as it dries slowly. So we have all of these materials in kit form. If you want a kit for this project, we have them at beadplace.net. And we also have all of the supplies and materials for a number of projects that you can see here on the channel. So make sure to click the link in the description to find any of the tools or the materials that we've used in today's project. Thanks so much for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more.